Welcome, Life Alright, everybody, it's your boy Nitro, and we're getting ready to watch a video on the Rock Island Arsenal, Army weapons facility, and what was found in the 1830s. And there was 52 mounds, and there was cities built underneath some of these mounds with giant skeletons found from 7 foot to 9 foot 6, 9 foot 2. But it's all been hidden in this big giant conspiracy theory, everybody. So here we go. Let's get started. Like, subscribe, and share. All right, everybody. Ready? Are you ready? I might have to zoom in a little more. There we go, everybody.
I was tracking the pattern north from St. Louis, following the Mississippi River, trying to understand the full extent of what had been built along these waterways. And there it was, an island 180 miles upriver from Cahokia. 53 documented mounds, the largest concentration on the upper Mississippi River, outside of the Cahokia complex itself. But when I started looking for what happened to those mounds, when I tried to find modern archaeological studies or site reports, I hit something unusual. Not absence of information, active restriction. Because Rock Island isn't accessible for archaeological study, it's been a US Army weapons facility since 1862. Let me be clear about what this means. Rock Island Arsenal is an active military installation, manufacturing center for military weapons, security clearance required for access. And every one of those 53 mounds that Atwater documented in 1838, every stone chamber that was found inside them, every piece of evidence about who built them and how large they were, is now behind armed guards and military classification. And inside those mounds, every single time one was opened, workers found the same thing. Stone chambers, copper weapons, and skeletal remains that couldn't be explained away as normal burials because the bones were too large, the skulls too massive, the proportions too far outside human range. The Army knew this when they seized the island in 1862. They had the surveys, they had the documentation, they knew exactly what was under the ground they were building on, and they built anyway. Factories on top of burial chambers, runways over stone structures, munition storage on top of what earlier observers had called the resting place of giants. Rock Island sits 180 miles north of St. Louis. Same river, same civilization, same pattern of sophisticated stone construction, giant skeletons and copper metallurgy that characterized Cahokia and the greater Mississippian complex. Where St. Louis flattened their mounds for city development, where Missouri flooded their valleys with Army Corps dams, Rock Island did something different. They militarized the evidence, made it classified, put it behind armed guards and national security restrictions. And the result is that Rock Island Arsenal, one of the most significant archaeological sites in North America, has been completely off limits to investigation for 163 years. The first systematic survey of Rock Island came in 1837. Caleb Atwater, an archaeologist working for the American Antiquarian Society, spent 6 weeks documenting the mounds. His report, published in 1838, provides detailed descriptions. He counted 53 distinct mounds. He measured the largest at 38 feet in height, covering nearly 3 acres at its base. And he noted something strange about their arrangement. The mounds weren't randomly scattered. They were positioned in what Atwater described as geometric relationship to each other. Lines.
And that's where my daddy is buried, over on the Rock Island Arsenal for serving in Vietnam. Now, it's a conspiracy theory. Look at them giants, put them skeletons on there, y'all. They look like 9 foot 2 inch skeletons to me. I bet Doug would agree. Tim, on the other hand, is low CD. But this is Rock Island Arsenal, y'all. This is where I was born. So let's get back to it.
would be drawn connecting certain mounds, forming patterns, squares, triangles, alignments that suggested astronomical observation or ceremonial purpose or urban planning, something intentional. Atwater received permission from local Sauk and Fox tribes to excavate one of the smaller mounds. What he found matched discoveries being made across the Midwest. A stone chamber, not a simple pit burial, a constructed space with walls, a corbelled ceiling, evidence of engineering knowledge. Inside the chamber, 3 skeletons. Atwater's measurements recorded in his field notes showed femur lengths of 31, 32, and 34 inches, respectively. Standard human femurs measure 18 to 20 inches. The proportions don't work. These weren't tall humans. The math puts them at 8 to 9 feet in height. But here's what makes Atwater's findings significant beyond the measurements. He found copper artifacts, not ceremonial pieces, functional tools and weapons, a copper axe head that Atwater weighed at 14 pounds. He noted in his report that he could barely lift it with one hand, let alone swing it effectively. Designed, he wrote, for hands and arms of considerably greater strength than modern men possess. This matches exactly what I documented in Ohio, where railroad workers found copper implements sized for giants. The same pattern. Functional equipment, not ceremonial objects. Tools and weapons scaled to users who stood 8 to 9 feet tall. The Sauk and Fox tribes who gave Atwater permission to excavate weren't surprised by what he found. They called the island Vandruff's Island back then, after an early settler, but they had older names for it. Names that translated to Place of the Old Ones or Island of Giants. They told Atwater their people hadn't built the mounds. The mounds were there when their ancestors arrived, built by people who came before, tall people who worked in stone and metal. Atwater's 1838 report generated significant interest. Other researchers requested permission to study the island. The Smithsonian, newly founded, expressed interest in conducting comprehensive excavation. Local historical societies wanted access. But by 1840 the requests were being denied. The island was privately owned and the owners weren't granting permissions anymore. And here's where the timeline becomes interesting. Then came 1855, the year the Army Corps of Engineers first proposed using Rock Island for military purposes. Their reasoning was strategic. The island sat at a crucial point on the Mississippi between Illinois and Iowa, accessible by rail and river, perfect for an arsenal, for weapons manufacturing, for military logistics. But before they could propose anything officially, they needed surveys. They needed to know what was on the island. And in 1855, a team of Army engineers spent 3 months mapping Rock Island in detail. That survey report still exists. Parts of it are publicly accessible, parts remain restricted even today. What's public is revealing enough. The engineers documented all 53 mounds. They noted anomalous stone structures visible at the surface in several locations, and they made test excavations in 4 separate mounds. The report from those excavations is carefully worded. It describes burial chambers of sophisticated construction and skeletal material of unusual dimensions. It notes the presence of copper implements of significant mass and apparent functional design. And it includes measurements, skeletal measurements that range from 7 feet 6 inches to 9 feet 2 inches. Here's where the pattern becomes clear. The Army knew what was on Rock Island before they built there. They had documentation. They had measurements. They knew they were dealing with stone construction, giant skeletons, and sophisticated metallurgy. The 1855 report even concludes with a recommendation that the island presents significant archaeological interest and may warrant preservation for scientific study. But then it adds something else. It notes the island's strategic military value, and it suggests that, should military necessity require utilization of the site, careful documentation and collection of materials should precede construction activities. That recommendation was filed, noted, and then apparently ignored, because when the Army seized Rock Island in 1862 during the Civil War, the promised careful documentation and collection didn't happen. Or if it happened, the records disappeared. The seizure itself was rapid. July 1862, the island was declared a military reservation, private owners were compensated, access was restricted, and construction began immediately, not just for military use during the war, but for permanent facilities. Within a year, the first factory buildings were under construction, and those buildings...
Look at that sexy green machine. Y'all know what her name was. Carlita. So everybody, don't forget, please like and subscribe, everybody. Peace, everyone.